Welcome to Omaha's #1 health and community podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rodney White, and I truly hope you enjoy today's episode. We will, of course, talk about health and the many things you can do to live a happier, healthier, and more fulfilling life. But we'll also keep you abreast of what's going on within our community and often share some special guest interviews so that you can get to know the stories of some of the wonderful people who are in and around Omaha. To stay up to date with Sapi Chiropractic, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, and you can find our website at sapicchiro.com. So today's podcast guest, Desiree Lotz, is an absolute wealth of knowledge. She's been in the health industry for probably around 40 years, and it all started with her own health journey, I guess, or her health journey started when she was struggling to get pregnant all those years ago, and she shares that in the interview. She's developed a really cool product that's called CalMag. It's a combination of a specific type of calcium mixed with magnesium, because the majority of calcium supplements we get out there is the wrong calcium and creates more trouble than it helps. And we go into all of that in the interview. It really is quite wide-ranging. We touch on osteoporosis, on the hidden symptoms of dehydration, how she uses this product to help people with addiction. She's quite an amazing lady. So I think you'll really enjoy this episode, and we'll definitely have to get her on again to go in a little more depth on some of the topics that we sort of brushed the surface with. So I really think you'll enjoy this episode. As always, leave us a comment and let us know what you liked about it or what else you'd like to hear. And if you haven't rated and reviewed the show yet, please do, because it helps us reach more of the masses. So thanks so much, as always. And without further ado, here is today's episode. Well, Desiree, thank you so much for joining us today. We've been looking forward to doing this interview. We had some technical troubles last time we tried to make it happen. And our audience, they like all the interviews we do, but they especially love the health-based ones. And so when you and your team reached out to us, we thought you'd be a perfect guest to have on. And you've got quite the journey. I mean, you've been helping people with health for more than 4 decades. So why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, let them know a little bit about your story, and we'll kind of just dive in on some tangents on what we think people want to hear, and we'll touch on what you specialize in, and especially some of the products that you make and sell, and we'll get into all of that.
Okay. Thanks for having me here. I mean, I enjoy all this crazy stuff. But anyway, so basically I started more than 40 years ago. I found Adele Davis. Many people don't even know who she is anymore, but she's a very famous nutritionist, an American. And I was not falling pregnant, but of course I was doing all the things that you do to fall pregnant. So then I happened to find her, and then I found out about vitamin E, how important it is for the hormones and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, then I fell pregnant. And then another thing that's very interesting that she actually talks about is having enough vitamin E when you go, especially when you go into labor, because the vitamin E provides oxygen in the bloodstream. So if you have enough oxygen in your bloodstream, the baby also is getting enough oxygen. So if the cord happens to be around the baby's neck, the chance of survival is much, much better. Anyway, so that's kind of how I started. And then...
Well, so Desiree, that's very specific. So at the time, were you working in the health industry at all, or this all came about just because you were having your own troubles, had tried everything else, found Adele, started using and probably researching vitamin E and its effects during there? And is that really just the trigger that sent you on this cascade?
Yeah, it was the trigger. So, I mean, I've always lived a healthy life because my family, we didn't buy food in restaurants and all that. We really grew up healthy. And, I mean, South Africa was much more basic than here in America, and I'm sure Australia is the same. But it's like really basic. So I didn't have any of those. So then when this happened, it was like, that's interesting. So I learned some stuff. And then I started to help people with this information. And then I can't even remember how many years later, I trained to be a detox specialist, a very specific program. You help people either you help them get off drugs and get through this program and get the drug particles out the system, or we all are exposed to chemicals and all kinds of toxins. So the program is designed for everybody to clean out the system. So I trained on that. And while
not just detoxing, because usually right now when we talk detox, especially for a lot of people who are listening, we're more the second one that you said, we're detoxing from chemicals. But because I know in some of your work, you work with addiction, so you're actually helping people get off, like detox off real, not just, we shouldn't call them under the radar chemicals because they're still very dangerous. But you can also help people who were full blown addicted to alcohol, drugs, that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, I did that, but I haven't done that for many years. And then my daughter actually started the first residential facility in South Africa, or in Africa, and I was the detox person as well. So you kind of you learn how to help people get off. You can't just suddenly stop stuff. You would know that. So you got to get them off, and then then we use vitamins to help, because it's a huge deficiency also that will create a problem. And so over the years, I've kind of really learned a lot about that type of thing. And when running this program, I can give you information about what happens to the toxins in the body. I don't want to forget. I might. I'm just going to make a note. Anyway, so basically, when you're doing people on this program, they're in a sauna for many hours in the day, and they have to do it under your control, because there's all kinds of things happen, dehydration and the symptoms that can manifest. And anyway, so then it's like, so you got to watch them. So the thing that I learned, and I learned a lot more much later about the dehydration. I've really learned so much about it. That what causes dehydration and how to solve the problem with dehydration. And part of the detox program is also this CalMag mix. So you mix the calcium gluconate, you mix magnesium carbonate and apple cider vinegar, and you make this CalMag mix. And that's what's used on the program. But I have a product that is an instant one. You just put the powder in the glass and you put the boiling. It's got everything in it. All you have to do is dissolve it. So
how did you stumble onto that recipe and that mixture that, hey, this is what people are going to need when they're detoxing?
That is part of the program. It's a very specific program, and it's got the whole formula with all the vitamins you have to take, and you monitor certain symptoms the person is experiencing, and if they're still having symptoms, you keep them on that vitamin dose, and then when the symptoms subside, you increase the dose. And one of the major particles in there is niacin, which is vitamin B3. Now, anybody who goes off to take some niacin can have a huge reaction, because niacin also eliminates radiation. And radiation is, it's accumulative. It builds up in the body. It doesn't there's no other way for it to get out the body, but niacin pushes it out. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I can go into on that, but I think that might be too much for this right now. But what I'd like to explain is about the particles. We all exposed to chemicals, and we've people on medication, and these are so many side effects, and so many of those. They are actually very toxic. They kind of on the same par as drugs, if you want to call them common drugs. So basically what happens is the human body is very clever. It can offload certain amount of those toxins if you're doing some kind of a detox program, but it cannot let me take that back. It can offload, generally speaking, in normal life, it can offload some, but it can't offload all. So what the body does, it coats it in fat, the particle, and deposits it in the fatty tissue. So it's sitting there. So the example I give to people is like if you say you go to the pub with your wife and you're both getting drunk, and there's a guy over there and he's flirting with your wife, and you get like mad, and the two of you start punching each other, the guy and you start punching each other up, and you get knocked around and whatever. So these are things that create certain things in the mind. So what happens is it's all locked up, and now these alcohol particles are deposited in your fat. Now you go home, you sleep off the alcohol. Next day you're kind of fine and you're okay with your wife and everything. And say a couple of days later you go to work and you're chiropracting a lot of people and you haven't eaten. So your blood sugar is dropping. So what happens is the body gets it. So your energy levels is dropping, and the blood sugar obviously drops too. So what the body does, it's very clever. It pulls on the fat to get energy. So now this fat comes into your bloodstream, and it just so happens to have these alcohol particles locked up in it. And now it gets released into your bloodstream. So now you start to get all the same emotions you had when you were mad with the guy and your wife, and you're feeling angry and you're feeling upset and whatever, and you go home and you yell at your wife and do whatever, and anyway, so then you eat and maybe you start to feel okay, but these particles are still there. So anytime a person has had, there's all kinds of, you could talk about any kind of, and they've had any kind of impact, especially if there's been impact. So if you and the guy were fighting, there would be some impact. And so these things create this problem, and then it locks up in the fatty tissue. And the minute that gets released, those bad reactions and feelings come back.
So you're really linking a lot of the emotional trauma at the same time as the chemicals that are physically getting locked up in there.
Exactly. I even have a health, and when you're detoxing and you're on a weight, now this is key, when you're on a weight loss program, you actually are detoxing because your body's offloading fat in some way or other. I have a weight loss health coach up in upstate New York. She private labels the CalMag, and she puts her patients or clients, whatever you call them, on this because of this exact thing. So that because now let's say you are on a weight loss program and you're losing weight, and these particles are coming out, and they just so happen to contain all the bad feelings and upsets from somewhere, and then you feel them. Now, you could get bloated in your stomach. You could just feel stomach cramps. You could just feel unhappy, upset, all kinds of different things. And then a lot of people just give up. I'm not doing this anymore. It's too uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And the CalMag helps to kind of reduce those feelings. And so it's so important, the calcium and magnesium, and this is a very specific form of calcium in my product. And it's so important for if you look at calcium is the most abundant mineral in the body. Magnesium in relation to that is the next most abundant mineral. And these are vital for the nervous system to work. So the calcium helps the nerves to contract the muscles and the heart and all this, and the magnesium relaxes. So I kind of get people to look at a picture of a caterpillar. So the worm goes like this, calcium, this, magnesium. So in order for this to function, you have to have that. So, and calcium gluconate, believe it or not, is the most potent painkiller there is. It's more potent than morphine. And I've been through many, many experiences with this. Even had a kid my son had a really nasty accident and he was dying, and we had to rush him to hospital. And when he came out of his coma, he asked the doctor to stop the drugs, but he could hardly hear him. And he stopped the drugs and we got him onto the CalMag. But when I actually had my son, when I went into labor with him 36 years ago, my husband made the original CalMag, not the instant one of mine, but the original one that was used on the detox. He made a 2-liter flask of the CalMag. So that 2 liters is, I don't know how many that's in gallons.
It's 3.7 liters to a gallon, so it's almost 1 gallon.
Yeah. Okay. So probably half. Yeah. So basically, what happened?
Oh no, I'm sorry.
Half a gallon, almost half a gallon.
Yeah.
So I was in labor, got to the hospital, and I started to drink the CalMag, and I drank about 3/4 of that CalMag, and you know how much pain I had?
I'm guessing not much.
No, zero. I was so relaxed and chilled. And I learned a lesson. It's like, crikey, it's more potent than morphine and it's not addictive.
Mm-hmm. So this is a product that, so if someone's going, because we have a lot of people who are detoxing either because they're doing weight loss or maybe they're detoxing from a mold exposure, or maybe they're doing some heavy metal chelation and they're positive MTHFR, so they're really struggling to get rid of everything. So any one of those examples, people could be using this mixture, and,
yes.
and they can get that directly from you, right? Like we can leave a link in the show notes if someone's interested to look into it. It's going to probably have all the information and the research behind it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you have to go through all my articles on my site to get all the data, but the research, I've got a lot of information, a lot.
We'll make sure we link to that as well, for sure.
Yeah, and I get some of my information actually comes from Dr. Royal Lee, and you know who he is, eh? Dr. Royal Lee, the founder of Standard Process.
Oh, okay.
Standard Process.
Yep.
He's great. So between him and Adele Davis, they are my go-to boys.
So if someone, let's say someone in Omaha wanted to do a detox program with someone helping them, if you're in an area where there isn't someone who does this with the sauna and everything else, what do you recommend they do?
I'm not too sure about that, because if it's a detox program, they'd have to go to a facility that delivers it or get somebody to come out. I think there are people that go and do it in your area,
okay.
Like mobile kind of thing. So that is an option, yeah.
But if someone's just doing their own work, either they're trying to do weight loss, or maybe they're working with a functional med doctor to break down heavy metals or whatever else, this CalMag they can still safely take to help and probably speed up that process, right?
Yeah, the actual detox program, I would never recommend anybody does that on their own or without a properly trained person. But the CalMag, absolutely, for sure. And there's so many things that I can. Actually, Dr. Royal Lee also. There's so much good information that we can help them with.
Right.
And if they're experiencing any discomforts or anything like that, they can always reach out and ask me questions and stuff like that. I'm always happy to help. And there's no obligation. And
you were saying off camera that you've found a lot of chiropractors whose patients use this. It seems to negate some of that. I guess when someone's in a lot of pain, as a lot of our listeners would know, you come and get adjusted, you feel better in the short term, but it takes time to break down the scar tissue and the damage and reset the nervous system. And in that is a lot of ups and downs of pains. You were saying that you've found that people who are taking this CalMag seem to, at least from a symptom standpoint, they hold better after an adjustment until the work can get through. Yeah. Yep, because calcium feeds, calcium magnesium are what, just to give you a little bit of a broader picture, because my subject is also on dehydration, which is other minerals which you get in sea salt, but I won't get into that subject today. If you want to do another one sometime, we can. But basically, if you think of the electricity as it comes into the house or your office,
when it's all working good, the lights work, the computer works, your thing doesn't give trouble, and it all works. But then there's interference, and you get a little bit of flickering maybe or something. And there's various stages of that. And in worst case scenario, blackout. Now, I'll relate that to blackout is body death, but don't go into that part of it. But if you think of that, the different flickering and that aspect, now if you go into the human body, the electrical current of the human body is created by minerals. So you're getting enough minerals, and I've got so much information about all these different aspects, which would be another subject. But if you're
Desiree, that's all on your blog, right? If we link to that, you've got a lot of this information there, correct?
You can find the dehydration.
Perfect.
Now, what's very interesting, if you look at the list of dehydration symptoms, you will find the bulk of what people get put on medication and so-called drugs for are in that list.
Yep.
And blood pressure is one of them. Now, it's like it's so. I have a problem with the average general medical system. So
well, you're talking to the right audience, because
I know.
So do a lot of our listeners. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, I had a person here from France many years ago, and she couldn't go into a certain building because her blood pressure was way too high. It was obviously a threat for that place. So she came to see me, and I tested her. And in those days, I was getting these. I just haven't got it anymore. I need to do more research and see if I can find it. This is seawater.
Mm-hmm.
And seawater contains about 80 minerals, roughly. So sea salt, and I use this one, Celtic sea salt, it's got roughly about 80 minerals in it. So now, so she came to see me, and then I tested her, and she needed 8 of these, which is quite a lot. And then she called her doctor in France, and he said, no, you can't do that. Your blood pressure, blah, blah, blah. But she didn't listen to him, and she did what I said. The next day, her blood pressure was way down, and she could go into that building.
Isn't that great? So, it's amazing how salt's been made out to be the enemy, yet a lot of our listeners know, yes, you've got to drink a lot of water, but you've got to have the electrolytes in there, whether it's Himalayan salt, Celtic sea salt, trace minerals, whatever of those you put in, we've got to help get the cells and the current going. So it's just amazing how I continue to see salt get made out to be the enemy when,
but there is an enemy in salt. There is an enemy. That white rubbish you buy in the supermarket.
Oh, it's full of plastics and contaminants, right?
And not only that, they take this good stuff, they extract sodium chloride from this, they bleach it and then compress it and all what you just said.
Yeah.
All that's in there. So it's like, that is poison, and now the question I generally ask people, which you might know the answer, is I say, can drinking water dehydrate you?
Well, of course, if you don't have those minerals in there. Right. And so, so I get so many people come in frustrated when maybe we've been having to adjust them more than normal and their body tissues are very, very tight. And we tell them, hey, I think you're dehydrated. They say, I can't be. I drink so much water. I drink liters a day or gallons a day. And as soon as they add some either trace minerals that they've bought or some good quality salt, they say, well, gosh darn it, I'm not feeling those symptoms anymore.
Perfect. That's exactly. And then the other thing that you just said too is I drink gallons of water. There's so many suggestions online. Drink so many of those a day, and I tell people, do not do that. You drink what your body needs, but you make sure you've got the minerals. And then because the minerals pull it into the cells, Yeah,
and I know in a lot of detox programs, for example, like the Cowden protocol, if you're trying to get rid of Lyme disease, he's very big on don't drink huge amounts of water at one time. Drink little amounts all throughout the day. So you're continuing to get that into your system. And he even says in the Cowden protocol, which I don't necessarily agree with because I think you can make up for it by adding your minerals or your salt, He even says don't use reverse osmosis filtered water. Now, I think if it's as long as it's remineralizing,
yes,
what other water are you going to drink though? I mean, bottled water is mainly garbage. Tap water is killing you. But I like his point that drinking lots of little bits of water throughout the day is going to help your body continue that detox process, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And the RO water, I'm against it from the point of view that it makes it a hungry water. But like you said, if you put this back in it, you're good.
Yeah, no, it's good to hear that, because that's the advice we give a lot of people. And so, outside of a lot of that, now let's talk a little bit about where stress comes into play here, because this is a big one that we've talked a lot about in the last couple of years, especially with this whole pandemic and the fear. And we normally talk to our audience about there's three kinds of stress. There's the physical, there's the emotional, and there's the chemical. And I think most people really understand physical easily. If you slip and fall and hurt yourself, it's obvious you'll be in pain, right? Or you damage tissue. If you have chemicals that set your body off, most people are now becoming aware enough that they eat some MSG and maybe they feel like they're hungover or whatever. But I don't think enough people appreciate when there's emotional stress. They say, well, I carry my stress in my neck. I feel my shoulders get tight. But they don't appreciate what it's doing on that cellular and quantum physics level. So I know that's a big piece of your training and understanding. Why don't we go there? Because everyone's going to benefit from that conversation.
Okay, for sure. So first of all, basic good nutrition. I have a formula on my website too called How to Build a Healthy Body. And it basically comes mostly from Adele Davis. And then there's CalMag. She talks about calcium, but I've got the CalMag. And if you have enough of that type of thing, it's got all the basics. It's got brewer's yeast, non-GMO, all my stuff, non-GMO. Brewer's yeast has got all the B vitamins in balance. They're not 25 of this, 25 of this, 25 of this. In a food source is never, a fixed amount. So it's all in balance. It also has some minerals in it, but because of the high phosphorus in it, you have to have the calcium to balance that up, but you need calcium anyway. And then I've also got lecithin in there, which is also kind of part of the detox program. Lecithin is part of it because lecithin is an emulsifier. And I've got pictures on my site and stuff where you can see, for example, I'll shake this up now. These two bottles of water, these two bottles have both got the same amount of water and oil in them. This one's got lecithin in it. So lecithin is an emulsifier. It breaks down the particles. And they use lecithin as an emulsifier in chocolate and all kinds of things.
So for those who are listening and not watching this, you've got the one bottle that you can see the oil and water doing its normal separation thing. The one with the emulsifier, it's all staying mixed.
Yes. And basically oil particles are bigger than water particles. They even use that in the paint industry. So if the paint they use it to break down the particles in the paint because there's apparently all kinds of particles in there. So and then I've got another subject about cholesterol and all the misinformation about that too. But basically, that program, the nutrition program, I call it How to Build a Healthy Body, is so basic, and it's got all the basic things that a person needs nutritionally, and you can drink that stuff as much as you want in a day because it's all food. So you're not going to overdose on any of it. And then, so there's that first start with that is get people's body in place, because when your body is not well fed, the blood sugar does this. And when it does this, you very often get in, and people ending up with diabetes get put onto psychiatric drugs and all kinds of stuff that are horrendous. So that's blood sugar spikes. So, I mean, I've got two people that stay close to me. They're not my family or anything, just neighbors. And I was trying to help them with their bodies because I do muscle testing to help find out what their bodies need. And they were both diabetic. And I went into their homes to go and help them. oh my goodness, when I opened their medicine cupboard, I knew I couldn't help them. It's just it's insane. So basically, if your body basics are in, you're well fed, that's the first start. And because my basic purpose is to help people get attention off their bodies so they can have their attention outwards, which is, up on the mountain, up looking outwards, So basically, if the body's basics are in, then your attention can be on more positive things.
Well, there's no way you'll handle and adapt to emotional stress if physically your body's going through these huge blood sugar spikes, and it's just impossible. Now, something else I want to make sure we don't miss. You're talking a lot about calcium, and we know calcium is so important for the body, but I think one place where it's been overabused because I think you could talk a number of reasons they're not using the right calcium and there's no balance. You look at you talk a lot about health misinformation on osteoporosis. How many women are being just shoved on calcium drugs without any respect to the magnesium balance, the vitamin D that's deficient? Now, let's touch on that, because I know a lot of our female listeners are prescribed calcium, and they're hearing you say, we need all this calcium, but they've often heard me say, not for osteoporosis. So let's.
That's a perfect question. I love it because that calcium is part of the bad calcium. And Dr. Royal Lee actually tells you calcium gluconate and calcium lactate are the two calcium. And I do have an article on my site. So basically, this is what happens. And this is interesting because very often people get tested and get told they got too much calcium. So here's what happens. We all know we need vitamin D to absorb calcium. Okay, so now the calcium comes into the body and it's floating around in the bloodstream. Now, how do you get it from the bloodstream into the tissues or the bones or wherever it's supposed to go?
Well, the vitamin D is the magnet, isn't it?
Vitamin D is to bring it into the body. And it brings it in, but it brings it into the bloodstream. Now you've got to get it from the bloodstream into those other places. And you won't believe this, because I learned this a few years ago. And essential fatty acids are the vital aspect there, so that that pulls it into the bones or the tissues, wherever it's supposed to go. And the calcium carbonate, that is dangerous. And a lot of those calcium tablets and stuff, if you look and see, it's all the wrong form of calcium. Then it deposits behind the eyes, and that's you start to get the eye problems, and it's in the kidneys and all over in the wrong places, because it can't absorb into the body and be used, because it's not the right form of calcium.
No, and it's a big part of the plaques in our arteries too, isn't it? So
exactly,
we're pumping our older population with this calcium, and then we're shocked when they get these degenerative blood and eye disorders. I think that overprescription of calcium is a big part of it. But they never want to prescribe for osteoporosis vitamin D and vitamin C and magnesium, which all the right calcium.
And the fish oil. Well, I've gotten the article with Dr. Royal Lee's information. It is just so important. And even sunburn is he calls it hypervitaminosis D, where you've got too much D, and the calcium, it's low tissue calcium. That's the problem that causes that, and canker sores and all that. That's a sign of low tissue calcium. And the reason for that is either the wrong form of calcium or not the essential fatty acids to pull it into the tissues. This is a very good question. It's so important, and the right form of calcium is so important.
Well, so many of us, especially here in America, are deficient in the essential fatty acids because the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is so lopsided. Not enough people have that. So where in food then can people get the right calcium? Because, of course, everyone's told it comes from dairy, which we do not break down dairy to use the calcium that's there. So where can people get it from outside of supplementation?
I haven't looked into that terribly much because I've been working so long with this. And a lot of people are against dairy because they got all the other issues that go along with it, whatever. And I'm not too sure that you actually would get enough from that. You would have to consume a fair amount.
Yeah. So you're more, you've just used this CalMag product to help with that.
Yeah, and I test. Do you do muscle testing at your practice?
We don't do a lot of it, but a lot of our colleagues around here do. Yeah, and so as you say that, I'm thinking someone with osteoporosis probably should be using the CalMag as well, right?
Oh yeah, and then the essential fatty acids for sure.
Yeah,
yeah, and the way and the one that I use fish oil because then you got the whole thing. And I just like poured into that mix that I told you about. And yeah, you want to get a good quality fish oil. And I use Spring Green, but there are other good brands as well where you can get the real thing.
Yeah, because like so many supplements, it's such a shame that industry's been hijacked by these
big pharma.
Yeah, and these brands that they just make it garbage products which people are wasting their money on. And then I almost think that cynically that these companies have made it this way so they can then go test it and say, see, this supplement doesn't help this health condition, or we tested it and it didn't have as much in it as we said it was. Well, if you use a real nutraceutical company like Standard Process or like a lot of the companies we recommend, you're going to get good quality. So we're going to have everything in the show notes, but why don't you tell the audience where they can find you and read about you and contact you if they'd like to?
Okay. So they can write to me. Let's keep it simple. info@calmag-c.com. Okay. And my name is Desiree. calmag-c.com.
Okay, so for all the listeners, we'll make sure that is in the show notes, and that's where they'll be able to find information. Your blog and everything you've talked about will be navigatable on that site, right?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So, Desiree, there's so many topics you and I could talk on. We're going to have to get you on again sometime soon, and I think we should do, each time we chat, we should just pick I'll do an audience poll before the next time we have you and give them some options on what they want to hear about, whether we do a breakdown into osteoporosis and what they can do, whether it's dehydration. We're barely scratching the surface. So we'd love to have you back on at some point.
Yeah, this was fun. And I'm so glad we're so well aligned.
Yes, you fit our philosophy around health brilliantly. So this was fantastic, and we'll do it again soon.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Okay.
As always, thank you so much for listening. We certainly appreciate your valuable attention when you have so many other options of how to spend your time. If you like